Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Canada, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people who never expected to come face-to-face with true evil. From abandoned farmhouses to creatures that should not exist. From basements hiding secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Canada, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened when I was 29 years old. During the winter, I moved to a place most maps don't bother naming anymore: Willow Creek, British Columbia. I took the job because I was desperate. After my divorce, after the silence of my apartment started feeling louder than any argument, I accepted a night dispatcher position for a private logging road network. No coworkers, no supervisors, just a radio, a phone line, and a snowed-in office at the edge of town. Willow Creek looked harmless during the day. A gas station, a diner that closed before sunset, a handful of houses with lights that never stayed on too long. People were polite, but guarded. Conversations ended abruptly when I mentioned night work. My job was simple: answer calls from truckers, log accidents, dispatch help if needed. But on my first night, the radio crackled at 1:15 a.m., and a voice came through that didn't sound lost or injured. It sounded afraid of being heard. That was my first mistake. Answering it. The voice on the radio was male, maybe mid-40s, breathing too slowly for someone in trouble. "Dispatcher," he whispered. "Don't log this." I laughed nervously, assuming it was a prank. Truckers did that sometimes. But then he said my name. "Daniel, they listen when you write things down." I froze. No one in Willow Creek should have known me yet. I'd arrived less than 12 hours earlier. I asked for his location. Static swallowed my question, then the line cleared. "Mile marker 42, he said. "Where the road bends but shouldn't." I checked the map. There was no 42. The logging road ended at 39. When I told him that, he went quiet for several seconds, long enough for me to think the call had dropped. Then he whispered, "That's what it wants you to think." The line went dead. I reported it anyway. Protocol. But when I tried to log the call, the system timestamp flickered, 1:15 a.m., over and over, refusing to save. Outside my window, something moved between the trees. Slow, upright, watching. I didn't step outside after that. Not immediately. I told myself it was just fatigue, my mind filling the darkness with shapes that didn't belong. Still, I locked the door. Then I locked it again. At 1:30 a.m., the phone rang. This line wasn't connected to the public grid. Only emergency services and company supervisors had the number. When I answered, there was no greeting, just breathing, slow and measured, like someone trying not to panic. "You saw it, didn't you?" the voice asked. It was the same man. I asked how he got this number. He ignored me. "It stands where the forest doesn't move," he said. "If it notices you noticing it, it comes closer." I told him help was on the way, even though I hadn't dispatched anyone. There was nothing I could send. He laughed softly. "That's what everyone says." The call cut out mid-breath. Outside, the trees stood perfectly still, except for one shape that leaned closer to the road. By morning, Hollow Creek pretended nothing was wrong. I went to the diner for coffee, needing to be around people. The waitress, Marlene, according to her name tag, froze when I mentioned the radio call. Her hand tightened around the pot until coffee sloshed onto the counter. "You answered after 1, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. An older man in the corner booth stood up immediately and left. No goodbye, no glance back. Marlene leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "If they call again, don't respond." I asked who they were. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Once you hear it, you're already part of the conversation." I told her someone claimed to be stuck at mile marker 42. Her face drained of color. "There is a bend," she said, "but the road refuses to remember it. People who go looking don't come back the same, or at all." That night, as I returned to the dispatch office, the radio was already on, crackling, waiting. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't answer the radio. I sat with my hands folded, staring at the console as snow pressed softly against the windows. The forest felt closer now, like it had leaned in while I was gone. Every few minutes, the signal light flickered, never fully activating, just enough to remind me it was there. At 1:15 a.m., the radio turned on by itself. Static filled the room, then cleared into a chorus of faint voices layered over one another. Some cried, some whispered, one laughed, then a single voice rose above the rest. "Daniel," it said gently, almost kindly, "you didn't log us." I stood up so fast, my chair toppled backward. My reflection in the window looked pale and distorted, stretched thin by the darkness outside. "You're closer now," the voice continued. "That's how Hollow Creek works. Once you listen, the distance collapses." The signal meter spiked violently. Outside, footprints appeared in the snow, leading toward the door. I called the provincial emergency line. No signal. My phone displayed full bars, but every call failed instantly, as if the town itself refused to let anything leave. The radio crackled again, this time without static. "You can still choose," the voice said. "Most don't." I demanded to know what it wanted. A pause. Then, witnesses. The lights flickered. For a split second, the office filled with movement, shapes overlapping, standing where no one should fit. Faces pressed against the glass from the outside, eyes reflecting the light like animals caught in headlights. Then everything snapped back to normal. Except the door. The handle turned slowly, testing. I backed away, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might answer for me. The radio spoke one last time that night. "Tomorrow," it whispered, "you'll understand the bend." When silence returned, the footprints were gone. But something had scratched a message into the frost on the window. 1:15 a.m. By the next evening, I knew I wasn't leaving Hollow Creek without answers. The map on my desk looked wrong now. Lines bending where they hadn't before, mile markers faintly smudged as if erased and redrawn by an unsteady hand. When I traced the logging road with my finger, it extended past its supposed end, curling into the forest like something alive. At 1:10 a.m., I grabbed my coat and keys. Snow crunched under my boots as I drove toward where mile marker 42 shouldn't exist. The radio stayed silent, but the clock on the dashboard slowed, its ticking uneven. When it hit 1:15, the headlights flickered. The road bent sharply to the left. There was no sign, no marker. Just a narrow stretch of asphalt swallowed by trees that leaned inward, their branches tangled like interlocked fingers. In the middle of the bend stood a man. He raised his hand, not to wave, but to warn me. And behind him, something taller unfolded itself from the dark. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding sideways as the man vanished, like he'd never been there at all. The taller shape remained. It didn't have a face in any way I understood. Its outline shimmered as if it couldn't decide what form to hold. Long limbs bent at wrong angles, brushing the tree branches without moving them. When it stepped closer, the forest stayed perfectly still. The radio exploded with sound. Dozens of voices poured out, overlapping in panic and pleading. I recognized some from the diner. Others were strangers. One of them was me. The thing leaned down until it filled my windshield. And then I understood. It didn't hunt bodies. It collected moments. People caught at the edge of decision, frozen between staying and leaving. Hollow Creek wasn't cursed. It was feeding. The creature straightened and stepped aside, clearing the road. The message was clear. I could drive through the bend, or I could turn back and answer the radio forever. My hands shook on the steering wheel as the voices on the radio began to fade, one by one, until only silence remained. I turned the car around. The moment I did, the road straightened behind me, as if the bend had never existed at all. The trees relaxed, their branches no longer reaching. The clock on the dashboard resumed its normal rhythm. Back at the dispatch office, the door was unlocked. Inside, the radio hummed softly, warm and familiar, like it had always belonged there. A new log entry sat open on the screen, already filled out, already time-stamped. Night dispatcher, Daniel Mercer. Permanent assignment. I tried to quit the next morning, tried to leave town, but Hollow Creek doesn't allow goodbyes. The bus never arrived, my car wouldn't start. Every road sign led me back. At 1:15 a.m., the first call of the night came in. This time, I didn't hesitate. I answered. That was 5 years ago. I still work nights in Hollow Creek. People come and go, or think they do. Truckers report strange bends in the road. Locals swear they hear voices on dead lines. Some nights, new names appear in the logs without calls ever being made. I know where they come from. At 1:15 a.m., the radio rings. Sometimes it's a stranger. Sometimes it's someone who sounds exactly like me, asking questions I remember asking once. I warn them not to log the call. They always do. If you're listening to this because you're researching Hollow Creek, because you heard rumors or found this recording buried online, please understand something. If the road bends when it shouldn't, if the trees don't move when the wind blows, don't stop, don't answer, and whatever you do, don't stay on the line past 1:15 a.m. because Hollow Creek is still hiring, and it never lets witnesses go. My name is Clara Bennett, and this happened during the harshest winter I'd ever experienced, in a small, overlooked town called Maple Ridge, Ontario. I moved there to take a teaching position at the local high school, hoping for peace and stability. Maple Ridge was picturesque during the day. Snow-draped streets, maple trees heavy with frost, and warm lights glowing through the classroom windows. But the town had a strange rhythm after sunset. Even the dogs stopped barking. Even the wind seemed to pause. It began subtly. Students whispered about missing pets, unmarked tracks in the snow, and strange lights hovering in the tree line. I laughed it off at first. Small towns had their legends. But one evening, driving home after grading papers, I noticed the street I'd always turned onto was gone. The intersection existed on the map, but the asphalt disappeared under a dense fog. And in the middle of the mist stood a shadow, a man, unmoving, staring directly at me. I didn't stop, and that's when the road disappeared entirely. The next day, no one believed me. Students giggled at my warnings, co-workers shrugged it off as stress, and the local grocer looked at me like I was losing my mind. But I had seen it. The shadow, the missing road, the fog. That night, I decided to confront it. I borrowed a colleague's truck and drove slowly toward the outskirts of town, following the faint trail I thought I remembered. The snow crunched under my tires, every echo amplified in the oppressive silence. At exactly 11:57 p.m., the fog began rolling in, thick and almost liquid. My headlights barely penetrated a meter ahead. And then the shadow appeared again. Closer this time, its form flickering like a broken reflection in water. I swerved instinctively, nearly hitting the edge of the forest. The fog swallowed the road behind me, erasing it as if it had never existed. I realized Maple Ridge wasn't just sleepy after dark. It was alive, and it didn't want anyone leaving. The fog never lifted that night. Every time I blinked, the edges of the road seemed to curl inward, as if the town itself were folding around me. I drove slowly, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. The shadow followed, not walking, not running, just drifting, always just beyond the headlights. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone displayed no service, despite being fully charged. Even the GPS spun in circles, showing the road I'd been on, suddenly leading straight into dense trees. Panic clawed at my chest as the air grew colder, sharper, like someone had opened a freezer outside the cab. Then I saw it. Faint lights in the distance, the dim glow of a house. Relief washed over me. But as I drew closer, the windows flickered with strange movement. Figures inside twisted unnaturally, their faces blurred. They looked alive and dead at the same time, frozen mid-motion. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, headlights illuminating nothing but fog and snow. I couldn't stay. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, but every attempt led me back to the same bend in the road. The fog thickened, and I realized something terrifying. Maple Ridge wasn't just hiding parts of itself. It was choosing what I could see. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement in the trees. Hundreds of shapes shifting unnaturally. They weren't running, they weren't walking. They hovered, stretching and twisting in impossible ways. My stomach dropped. I felt watched, cataloged, as if the town itself were judging me. I remembered the stories the locals whispered about missing people, pets, travelers who never returned. I had dismissed them as superstition, but now I understood. The town feeds on attention. It punishes observation. The shadow appeared again, this time at the edge of the fog, just beyond the road. It raised its arm, pointing me forward. Trembling, I realized that if I wanted out, I had no choice but to obey. I followed the shadow through the fog, my headlights cutting just enough through the whiteness to see the road beneath the tires. Every inch I drove felt like an eternity. The trees closed in as if they were alive, brushing against the sides of my truck without touching. I could hear something faint, like whispering voices, just beyond comprehension. Soft words that sounded like my name, calling me forward. The houses that finally appeared were wrong. Windows had no glass, doors led to walls, and the smoke from chimneys curled into impossible shapes before vanishing. A faint figure appeared in one of the windows, moving in jerky, unnatural motions, and I realized I was watching a replay of someone's last moments, trapped forever in the house's memory. My stomach twisted with fear, but the shadow waited patiently at the road's edge, a silent guide. One wrong move, I knew, and I might vanish into Maple Ridge itself, lost like all the others. At 12:03 a.m., I reached the center of the fog, where the road split into paths that didn't exist on any map. The shadow hovered, motionless, but something shifted behind it. A wave of figures emerging from the fog, walking backward, heads tilted unnaturally, arms stretched toward the road like they were reaching for me. Panic overtook me. I stomped the accelerator, the truck lurching forward, tires spinning on icy patches. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting beneath me as if the town were trying to swallow me whole. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the shadow followed, silent but watching, accompanied by those grotesque forms that now filled the fog behind. The whispers grew louder, layering with laughter, pleading and sobbing. They weren't just sounds, they were memories, echoes of everyone Maple Ridge had trapped. My chest burned, my hands shook. And then, just as suddenly, the fog thinned, the twisted houses disappeared, and the road returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had. The next night, I couldn't stay away. I had to know what Maple Ridge really wanted. I parked near the edge of the forest, watching the road twist beneath the pale moonlight. The fog rolled in again at 11:50 p.m., slow and deliberate, swallowing the familiar landmarks. The air felt heavier, charged like it was alive, watching my every move. I saw the shadow first, gliding across the snow toward me. It stopped just at the tree line, arms raised slightly, gesturing. I understood then. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was guiding me, forcing me to see what the town hid. I followed. Every step along the snow-packed road revealed strange marks, footprints that were too long, too thin, and sometimes bent backward. And through the fog, I glimpsed faces pressed against tree trunks, frozen expressions of terror and confusion, watching, waiting, trapped in some half-world between life and death. I realized Maple Ridge didn't just erase people. It absorbed their fear. I reached the bend that locals whispered about in hushed tones, the place where the road didn't behave like any normal street. Here, the fog swirled unnaturally, forming tunnels that seemed alive. Shapes moved within, half visible, half imagined. I could hear muffled cries, laughter, and whispers that sounded like my own thoughts being echoed back at me. The shadow stepped aside, revealing a figure I could barely comprehend. Its face was pale, indistinct, features shifting as if it were a mask of countless trapped souls. A hand rose, pointing to a small cabin deep in the fog, the door glowing faintly. I understood immediately. That was where Maple Ridge kept its lost. Every instinct screamed to run, but I felt compelled to approach. The snow crunched under my boots, each step a drumbeat of fear. The fog clung to me, whispering secrets in a language I almost understood, urging me to look closer, to witness what no one was meant to see. And as I stepped closer, the wind carried a single chilling word: welcome. I entered the cabin cautiously, the door creaking under my touch, though the fog outside absorbed most of the sound. Inside, the walls were lined with frozen memories. Photographs of people I vaguely recognized from town, frozen mid-motion, their expressions twisted in fear. It was as if Maple Ridge had captured fragments of life and trapped them behind glassy time. The faceless figure moved forward, leading me to a corner where a mirror hung crookedly. In it, I saw myself, not as I was, but fractured, multiplied across dozens of panes, each reflection screaming silently, eyes wide in terror. I realized the town didn't just absorb fear, it replicated it, storing it, feeding on the panic and hopelessness of those who wandered too far after dark. A whisper floated in the room. You belong here now. Panic surged, but my feet moved backward, out of the cabin, drawn by some residual instinct to survive. The fog was waiting. I never left Maple Ridge that night. The next morning, the cabin was gone, replaced by undisturbed snow and silent trees. When I returned to town, the locals acted as though nothing had happened. Smiles, greetings, routine. Yet I knew the truth. The town shifts, hides, and consumes. It waits for curiosity to lead outsiders into its fog, where it can absorb every ounce of fear. I moved into the teacher's house, taking precautions, avoiding the fog, never venturing onto the roads at night. But every night at 11:57 p.m., the wind carries whispers. And I know that somewhere in the fog, the shadow watches, waiting for someone else to stumble too close. Maple Ridge will never forget, and neither will I. I survived, but the town still calls. And those who ignore the warnings? They vanish silently, becoming part of its collection. If you ever find yourself on a fogged road in Ontario, hear whispers calling your name, or see a bend that shouldn't exist, do not stop. Do not follow. Because Maple Ridge never lets go. My name is Ethan Lawson, and this happened the winter I decided to take a break from city life and spend a few months in Blackwater, Nova Scotia. I thought the remote town would be peaceful, its dense pine forests perfect for hiking and solitude. Locals warned me about the woods, stories of people hearing whispers that led them astray. But I laughed them off. Small town superstition, I thought. The first few days were idyllic. Snow blanketed the trees, streams glimmered beneath thin ice, and the silence was comforting. But on the third night, while walking a trail near the edge of town, I heard it. A faint whispering, soft and melodic, carried on the wind. At first, I assumed it was the pines swaying, but the whispers repeated my name. Ethan. I froze. The trail behind me disappeared into shadows, and the familiar markers of the path twisted as though the forest itself was reshaping. The whispering grew louder, almost beckoning me deeper into the trees. I tried to turn back, but the trail no longer led to the main road. Every landmark I recognized seemed altered. Trees bent unnaturally, paths curling back on themselves. The whispering persisted, now layered, as if dozens of voices were calling from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Suddenly, I glimpsed movement between the pines. A figure, tall and thin, blurred as if I weren't meant to see it clearly. It vanished each time I blinked. Panic surged, but something compelled me forward. An instinct I didn't understand, as if the forest had promised an answer if I just followed. I stumbled over roots, snow crunching underfoot, and the whispering changed, growing urgent. Ethan, find us. Stay. The lights from Blackwater vanished behind the trees. I realized I wasn't just lost, I was being led somewhere. I stumbled through the snow, branches clawing at my coat and face, the whispers weaving around me like a living wind. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was pressing down, slowing me, trapping me. I tried to call out, to demand the voices stop, but my own words seemed to vanish, absorbed by the cold air. Then I saw it, a faint glow ahead, flickering between the trees. It wasn't a fire. It wasn't natural. It pulsed, soft at first, then violently, like a heartbeat echoing in the forest. The whispers became clearer, almost coherent. Ethan, join us. Don't leave. We're waiting. My instinct screamed to turn around, but my feet moved forward, drawn toward the light. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision. Elongated, humanoid, impossible shapes that twisted unnaturally. Every time I tried to focus, they disappeared, leaving only the glow and the endless snow. Something in the forest was alive, and it had chosen me. The glow led me to a clearing I had never seen on any map. Snow crunched underfoot, but it was strangely silent. No echo, no sound except the whispers that now surrounded me completely. And in the middle of the clearing stood dozens of figures. Tall, pale, faceless, frozen in poses like dancers mid-motion. Their eyes, or where eyes should have been, were black voids that seemed to absorb the moonlight. The whispers crescendoed, overlapping, almost deafening. "Stay, listen, never leave." Panic surged, but I realized I could move, and I needed to move. I ran toward the closest trees, but the forest bent impossibly, paths looping back to the same clearing. Every escape route disappeared, as if the forest itself had shifted, folding the world around me. I fell to my knees, gasping. My breath steamed in the freezing air, mingling with the faint golden glow of the faceless figures. They didn't advance. They didn't need to. The forest itself held me. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled uncontrollably. The whispers had grown louder, a chorus of pleading, laughing, and murmured names. Each voice sounded eerily familiar, as if they belonged to people I had known, or perhaps to those I might have been. I glanced around the clearing, trying to find a path through the dense pines, but the forest refused to cooperate. Every step I took led me back to the same golden glow, the same frozen figures, their black voids staring at me from every angle. One figure moved suddenly, stepping toward me with unnerving grace. Its arm extended, pointing deeper into the forest. Against every instinct, I followed. The snow beneath my boots felt softer, almost alive, guiding me forward. The whispers shifted in tone, urging me, seducing me, warning me all at once. I realized that the forest didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds, bending them with voices that promised safety, understanding, and escape, if only I listened carefully. I wanted to resist, but every fiber of my being was pulled toward the unknown, deeper in the forest. The trees grew impossibly close, their branches intertwining to form natural arches that blocked the moonlight. The glow led me to a small wooden structure, half buried in snow, looking more like a shrine than a cabin. Symbols were carved into the walls, strange patterns that pulsed faintly, almost breathing. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping in an incomprehensible symphony of sound, each voice vying for my attention. I stepped inside, and the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of pine and something metallic. The walls were covered with dozens of snow-streaked photographs, all showing the same faceless figures I had seen in the clearing, each image captured in a different pose, as if frozen mid-motion. In the center, a mirror reflected not me, but countless versions of myself, all kneeling, all staring, all silent. I realized then, in a sudden, horrifying clarity, that the forest didn't just trap travelers, it copied them, weaving them into its ever-growing collection of souls and shadows. I backed away from the mirror, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the forest wasn't done with me yet. The golden glow from the clearing intensified, and the faceless figures from earlier appeared along the edges of the shrine, gliding silently toward me. Their black void seemed to pierce through my soul, measuring fear, testing resolve. A whisper came directly into my mind this time. "Join us, Ethan, or leave nothing behind." Every instinct screamed to run, but the paths outside the shrine twisted impossibly, bending back toward the same clearing. I realized the forest wasn't random. It was alive, aware, and it demanded obedience. It wanted me to become another frozen echo, another memory in its collection. Desperation overrode reason. I sprinted toward a faint break in the tree line, the snow giving way beneath my boots. Behind me, I could hear the whispers accelerating, almost chasing me, and the shadows melted into motion, following. The forest had marked me as prey. I reached a narrow path that seemed untouched by the forest's distortions. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. The shadows began emerging from the fog, coalescing into twisted humanoid shapes, elongated limbs scraping the snow. The whispers became unbearable, layering screams, laughter, and my own voice repeating words I hadn't said aloud. I glanced back and saw the shrine in the distance, glowing brighter, almost beckoning. My mind screamed to turn, but terror propelled me forward. Every step felt like running through water, the snow gripping at my boots as if the forest itself wanted to slow me down. A figure stepped onto the path, taller than the rest, faceless, golden light emanating faintly from its edges. It didn't move toward me. It didn't have to. The forest bent toward it, and I knew instinctively that if I faltered, I would vanish completely, another echo trapped in the trees forever. I clenched my fists and kept moving, ignoring the whispers that promised safety if only I stopped. I ran blindly down the narrow path, snow spraying from my boots as the shadows twisted around the edges of my vision. The whispers escalated into an almost deafening roar, calling my name in voices I recognized and some I didn't. Each syllable vibrated through my skull, rattling my sanity. I risked a glance behind me. The faceless figures were everywhere now, gliding silently over snow, bending the trees toward me like hands ready to grab. Suddenly, the path ended. The forest stretched infinitely in all directions, but the glow of the shrine flickered faintly to my left. I knew instinctively that the only way out was through it. Heart hammering, I sprinted toward the light, my mind filled with terror and dread. I crossed the threshold. The whispers stopped instantly. Silence. For a moment, I thought I was free. Then the mirror appeared, hovering in midair, reflecting dozens of versions of me. Some frozen in the snow, others trapped mid-scream, all staring back with empty eyes. I understood instantly. The forest didn't just trap people. It replicated them, creating echoes, shadows, and memories, feeding on fear until nothing remained of the original. The mirror pulsed, the reflections shifting, some waving silently, some screaming silently, all beckoning me to join. I stumbled backward, but the floor beneath me was snow now, cold and unyielding. The golden glow expanded, and the faceless figures emerged around me, moving closer, merging with the forest itself. I realized I had one choice: keep running blindly, hoping to escape or face the truth. I ran straight into the fog, past the bending trees, past the glowing shrine, until the snow gave way to the faint outlines of Blackwater's outskirts. The whispers faded but lingered, a constant hum in my mind. I survived, but part of me remained. Sometimes, when the wind shifts through the pines, I hear a faint voice calling my name. Blackwater never forgets. I escaped, but the forest still waits for the next curious soul. My name is Samantha Pierce, and this happened during my first winter working as a night receptionist at the Willow Creek Inn, a remote lodge in northern Alberta. I had taken the job hoping for quiet and extra income, but I quickly realized this place was anything but ordinary. The inn was old. Victorian architecture, dark wooden beams, and a musty scent that clung to the hallways. Locals whispered about guests who arrived and vanished. Rooms that locked themselves, and strange cries echoing in the dead of night. But I dismissed it as folklore. The first week was quiet enough, I learned the layout, memorized the security camera feeds, and tried to ignore the cold draft that seemed to follow me through the corridors. But on my 7th night, around 2:13 a.m., the phones began ringing, every line at once, shrill and rapid. I answered the first one, but there was only breathing on the other end. And then I heard a faint whisper. "Samantha, don't look behind you." My heart hammered as I slowly turned to check the hallway, but nothing appeared. Only the long, empty corridor stretching into darkness. The cameras showed normal rooms, empty and still. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, and the whispers returned, growing louder and more urgent. "Don't ignore us. Stay with us." I tried calling my manager, but the lines were dead, static filling the receiver instead of a voice. I moved from desk to desk, checking guest registers and surveillance. But names appeared that I hadn't seen before. Entries time-stamped hours ahead, signed by people who didn't exist. Then, at the end of the hallway, I saw it. A figure, pale and translucent, wearing old-fashioned clothing, standing perfectly still with its head tilted, eyes locked on me. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a trick of the mind. The Willow Creek Inn had just claimed its first visitor for the night. I froze in place, staring at the figure. Its eyes, or the absence of them, seemed to pierce through me, and the whispers grew louder, surrounding me from every direction. The temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming along the edges of the reception desk, and my breath came out in visible clouds. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. The figure tilted its head again, then slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the grand staircase. My curiosity, or perhaps some darker compulsion, forced me to step forward. Each creaking stair sounded impossibly loud, echoing like a drum in the stillness. The whispers guided me, forming words I couldn't fully understand. But they promised answers. Answers about the disappearances, the strange entries in the guest register, and the guests who never left. When I reached the 2nd floor, the figure had vanished, replaced by an empty hallway. But the door at the end, room 6, was slightly ajar, and a faint golden glow spilled into the corridor. I approached room 6 cautiously, every nerve on edge. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a room that shouldn't exist in the inn's blueprints. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing strange symbols etched into the walls. Furniture sat in disarray, and a thick layer of dust suggested no one had touched the room for decades. Yet, the golden glow came from a small table in the center, where a stack of handwritten journals rested. I picked one up, and immediately the whispers intensified, now forming sentences. "Read. Remember. Do not leave." My fingers trembled as I opened the pages. The entries were dated decades ago, each one describing a visitor trapped in the inn, each page ending the same way. They disappeared after being lured by the whispers. A sudden movement at the corner of the room made me spin around. Another figure appeared, older, more menacing, and clearly aware of my presence. I realized then that the inn didn't just haunt. You could be taken. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, but the figure didn't advance. Instead, it hovered silently, almost patient, as though it had been waiting for me to reach this room. The whispers now formed a continuous chant, repeating my name over and over. My pulse raced, and a cold sweat ran down my back. The journals trembled in my hands, pages flipping rapidly, as though some unseen force wanted me to read faster. Each page revealed more horrors, accounts of guests who had vanished, descriptions of footsteps echoing in empty hallways, voices calling from locked rooms, and shadows that moved independently of their owners. One entry mentioned a visitor who had tried to escape through the fire exit but was never seen again. The words made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I realized with a chilling certainty the inn fed on fear, collecting its victims piece by piece, storing their terror like a trap. And tonight, it had set its sights on me. Desperate, I dropped the journals and ran toward the door. But the hallway outside had changed. The walls were warped, doors appeared where none had been before, and the floorboards creaked under invisible weight. The whispers escalated into agonized cries, overlapping with laughter that wasn't human. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the inn seemed determined to prevent it. I turned a corner and froze. There, at the end of the corridor, dozens of ghostly figures stood silently. Former guests, their faces pale and eyes empty, all staring at me. Their presence radiated despair, their whispers merging into a single chilling command. Stay. Become one with us. I ran past them, the floorboards groaning like warning bells. Each step felt like I was running through invisible resistance. I could hear the inn itself breathing, walls contracting, ceilings groaning, almost alive, forcing me deeper into its maze-like corridors. The Willow Creek Inn didn't just haunt, it trapped. I reached the grand lobby again, but it was no longer as I remembered. The ceiling seemed to stretch impossibly high, chandeliers swinging slowly though there was no breeze. The shadows of the past guests stretched along the walls, elongated and distorted, as though the inn itself had twisted reality around me. The whispers swirled like a storm, beckoning, warning, and mocking all at once. Then I saw it, a figure standing near the front desk. Pale, translucent, eyes hollow, but unmistakably human in shape. Its lips moved silently, yet I understood the words. You can leave, but part of you will remain. Fear coursed through me, but so did determination. I knew I had to find the hidden exit described in the journals before the inn claimed me completely. My boots crunched over warped floorboards, the walls seeming to shift to block me, while whispers echoed from every corner, a cacophony of warning and temptation. The inn wanted me to panic. It wanted me to stay. I ran down a narrow corridor that I hadn't seen before, guided by the faint light from the golden journals in my mind's eye. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, and the walls seemed alive, breathing, contracting with each step. Ghostly figures materialized along the hall, some reaching, some motionless, all observing. The whispers grew frenzied, overlapping with my own racing heartbeat, urging me to stop, to turn back, to succumb. Finally, I saw a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. A faint wind escaped, carrying the smell of pine and cold night air. I reached for the handle, but the figure from the lobby appeared behind me in a blink, hovering impossibly close. Its hand extended toward me, not in aggression, but almost like a warning. The inn's walls trembled as if alive, the whispers forming a single chilling word. Forever. I gathered every ounce of courage and pushed through. The night air outside hit me like a physical force, and the inn's whispers faded. But I knew it hadn't let go completely. I stumbled outside into the snow-covered courtyard, gasping for air. The night was silent, unnaturally so, and the glow of the inn behind me pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. I thought I was free, but the journals, still in my mind's eye, reminded me of what the figure had said. Part of you will remain. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the inn didn't just haunt its guests. It left a piece of their soul trapped within its walls. I turned back once, and for the briefest moment, I saw my own reflection in one of the frost-covered windows. Pale, eyes hollow, frozen mid-step. The figure from inside the inn appeared behind it, nodding, as if satisfied. I ran toward the main road, leaving the golden glow and the whispering corridors behind. But I knew the inn would always be waiting, patient, alive, and hungry for the next soul. The Willow Creek Inn had marked me. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night never faded. I left Alberta, moving hundreds of miles away. Yet every night I hear whispers when the wind blows, faint and beckoning. The journals haunt my dreams, filled with entries I don't remember reading, describing my own escape as though it had already been written. I know now that the Willow Creek Inn doesn't just exist in space, it exists in time, in memory, in fear. Every guest leaves a trace behind, every scream becomes part of its walls. Every glance at the hallways adds another shadow to its collection. The inn's hunger is insatiable, patient, and unending. I survived the night, but a piece of me is still there, echoing silently in the golden-lit corridors. I can never go back, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear my own voice whispering from the shadows. Samantha, don't leave. And I know, in my heart, that the Willow Creek Inn will never truly let me go. My name is Lucas Trent, and this happened the summer I decided to camp near Hollow Lake, a remote area in northern Ontario. I'd heard rumors from locals about strange lights flickering across the water at night, but I dismissed them as fishing boats or reflections of the stars. I set up my tent near the shore, surrounded by dense forest, with only the lake's dark waters for company. The first night was calm. Crickets chirped, the lake rippled gently, and the sky was clear, revealing a blanket of stars. But shortly after midnight, I noticed something unusual. Small, flickering lights appeared across the water, moving unnaturally. They weren't consistent with lanterns or boats. They hovered and darted, sometimes coming close to the shore, then retreating. Curiosity got the better of me, and I grabbed my flashlight to investigate. As soon as I stepped outside the tent, the lights seemed to react. They clustered and then separated, almost like they were observing me. I followed the lights along the shore, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Each step made the soil and gravel crunch, but the lights never got closer. They moved in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost intelligent. A chill ran down my spine as I realized there was no wind. The lake was perfectly still. Yet the lights danced and hovered as if guided by some unseen force. Then I noticed the reflections, or the lack of them. The lights didn't reflect in the water like normal objects should. I crouched to inspect the surface, and my flashlight caught something else. Faint silhouettes beneath the water, dark forms moving slowly, almost in sync with the hovering lights. A sudden splash behind me made me spin around, but the shore was empty. The whisper of water against trees sounded unnaturally close, like something large moving just below the surface. Hollow Lake wasn't just mysterious. It was alive, watching, waiting. I backed away from the shore, my heart pounding. The lights began to move faster, weaving intricate patterns over the water like living fireflies. I felt an irresistible pull toward them, a compulsion that made my legs move before my brain could catch up. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity anchored me to the shoreline. Suddenly, a loud, hollow cracking sound echoed across the lake. The water churned violently, and one of the lights shot directly toward me, bright and blinding. I stumbled backward, falling into the muddy shore. The light hovered over me for a moment, pulsating, then retreated into the darkness. Shaking, I scanned the lake and noticed a rowboat floating silently in the middle of the water, though no one had launched it. The lights circled the boat, dipping below the surface as if signaling something beneath. My stomach turned as I realized the silhouettes I'd glimpsed earlier were growing larger, rising toward the surface in slow, deliberate movements. Hollow Lake wasn't just mysterious. It was hunting. The lights began to converge on the rowboat, forming a tight circle as if performing a ritual. A faint humming filled the air, vibrating through my chest, echoing off the trees. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in near total darkness. I could see only the golden glow of the lights reflected faintly on the rippling water. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the lake itself. Tall, slender, water dripping from its pale, featureless form. It hovered above the boat, then turned toward me. Its presence was chilling, and I felt my knees weaken as the whisper of its voice echoed in my mind. "Come, join us. The lake remembers all." Panic took over. I scrambled back through the trees, my boots sinking into the wet earth, branches slapping my face. Yet the lights followed, bobbing between the trees, twisting and weaving around me like living predators. I realized then that Hollow Lake didn't just hold secrets. It claimed them, one soul at a time. I ran blindly through the forest, branches slapping against my face, mud sucking at my boots, but the lake's glow followed me. Every time I glanced back, the lights hovered just beyond the tree line, moving as if orchestrated by some unseen conductor. My chest heaved, and the whispers began again, insistent, almost pleading. "You can leave, but the lake will take what it must." Then I tripped over a root, landing hard on my hands. My flashlight flickered to life again, illuminating a narrow path leading downhill toward a small, abandoned dock I hadn't noticed before. The lake stretched behind it, unnaturally calm, the lights circling above the rowboat like hunters guarding their prize. I hesitated at the dock's edge. The water below rippled as if something massive moved beneath the surface. I could hear faint splashes and soft, mocking laughter. Hollow Lake didn't just want to be seen, it wanted acknowledgement, a soul to consume. And I feared it had already marked me as its next victim. I climbed to my feet and edged along the dock, every plank creaking under my weight. The lights above the rowboat began spinning faster, creating a vortex-like effect, reflecting golden streaks across the water. My stomach twisted as I realized the silhouettes beneath the water were no longer passive. They were rising slowly, some breaking the surface for just a moment, revealing elongated limbs and featureless faces. The whispers merged into a deafening chorus, all chanting my name. I knew I couldn't stay. I glanced around for an escape, but the forest behind me seemed impossibly far, distorted by the lake's eerie influence. The water near the dock started bubbling, and the rowboat began moving toward me, gliding over the surface without anyone aboard. I understood then that the lake had its own intelligence. It didn't just trap the curious, it lured them, testing their courage, dragging them slowly into its depths, while the lights and shadows toyed with their minds. I backed up to the edge of the dock, every muscle tensed, but there was nowhere left to run. The lights above the rowboat began to pulse violently, casting eerie shadows across the water and the surrounding trees. The golden glow reflected off the silhouettes beneath, showing twisted, faceless forms that seemed to stretch endlessly downward into the lake's dark depths. Then one of the figures broke the surface completely. It rose with impossible speed, towering above me, water cascading off its smooth, featureless skin. The whispers in my mind now formed words I could almost understand. join, become, never leave. My flashlight flickered and died completely, leaving me bathed only in the pulsing glow of the lights. Desperation overtook fear. I leapt off the dock, plunging into the freezing water, and swam toward what I hoped was the shore. Every stroke felt like swimming through molasses. Yet the lights followed, darting just beneath the surface like predatory eyes. I reached the far edge of the lake, shivering, limbs screaming from the cold, but I dared not stop. The lights remained above the rowboat, forming an almost hypnotic pattern that seemed to mark a trail straight toward me. Beneath the surface, the shadows moved faster, darting beneath my legs, teasing me, reminding me that Hollow Lake didn't forget. I gasped for air, pulling myself onto the muddy shore. The whispers faded slightly, replaced by the soft lapping of water and a distant owl's call. I looked back once, and the lake appeared calm, almost serene, but the golden lights had vanished, leaving only faint ripples on the surface. My chest heaved as I realized I had survived, for now. Yet, deep in my mind, I felt it watching. The lake had marked me, and I knew one day the lights would return, patient and unrelenting, waiting for another summer night to claim what it desired. I staggered away from the shore, soaked, shivering, and gasping for air. The forest loomed ahead, dark and silent, but every step I took, I felt eyes on me, as if the lake itself followed. My mind was a storm of fear and disbelief. The journals I later read would confirm what I feared in that moment. Hollow Lake didn't just scare people, it collected them. Each light, each shadow, each ripple in the water was a record of a lost soul. Suddenly, from the depths, a single light rose above the water, hovering just above the surface, spinning slowly. It pulsed gently, beckoning me, almost human. My stomach twisted as I realized it was mimicking my own form. The whispers returned, soft but insistent. "You cannot leave entirely. We are part of you now." I ran faster, refusing to look back. The lake was patient, eternal, and I had survived only because it allowed me, for now. Weeks later, I still wake in the middle of the night, haunted by the memory of Raven's Hollow. The whispers echo in my mind whenever I close my eyes, calling my name softly, insistent and patient. Every town I visit, every shadow I glimpse, feels connected to that silent place, as if Raven's Hollow follows me wherever I go. I understand now that it doesn't just take people. It chooses them, leaving a permanent mark on their souls. The faceless figures, the fog, the shifting buildings, they were all parts of its consciousness, testing me, observing, deciding my fate. I survived, but a piece of me will always remain tethered to that town, a living echo trapped in its silent streets. Raven's Hollow is patient. It waits. And I know one day it may call me back, ready to claim what it believes belongs to it. Until then, I live in constant vigilance, knowing that silence can speak, and sometimes it calls. My name is Ethan Moore, and this happened when I moved to Raven's Hollow, a tiny, isolated town in northern Manitoba. I had accepted a short-term job as a surveyor, mapping the outskirts of the town and nearby forests. From the moment I arrived, the air felt heavy, thick with silence. The streets were empty even in the middle of the day, and the few locals I saw avoided eye contact, speaking in hushed tones that carried an unease I couldn't ignore. On my first night, I stayed in the town's only inn. The building was old and creaky, but nothing unusual happened at first. Around 1:30 a.m., I woke to an eerie quiet that wasn't natural. Not a single sound of wind, rustling leaves, or wildlife. Even the distant hum of electricity was gone. Then I noticed something chilling. Every window in the inn reflected not just my room, but a faint outline of someone standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. And yet, the feeling of being watched refused to leave. I tried to shake it off as exhaustion and imagination, but the unease grew each night. I began noticing patterns. The town seemed alive in strange ways. Doors would open by themselves, items would shift from where I left them, and I sometimes caught glimpses of figures standing just at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I tried to look directly. One night, I ventured into the town square. A thick fog had rolled in, swallowing the buildings in a gray haze. At the center of the square stood the old clock tower, its hands frozen at 3:33 a.m., though I knew the time. As I approached, the fog parted slightly, and I saw dozens of shadowy figures standing silently along the streets. They didn't move, didn't speak, and yet I felt their eyes piercing me from every angle. Raven's Hollow wasn't abandoned. It was alive, patient, and aware. And it had begun observing me. The next day, I tried to focus on my survey work, but the town's unnatural quiet gnawed at me. Even the birds and insects were absent. As I marked trees near the edge of the forest, I noticed faint tracks in the soil. Footprints, small and human, but impossibly neat, as though someone had walked carefully to avoid making noise. I followed them a short distance, curiosity and fear warring in my mind. Then I heard it, a soft, low hum, vibrating through the ground. It was coming from deeper within the forest. I froze, realizing that the shadows I had glimpsed in the fog weren't just in the square. They were everywhere, observing, patient, waiting. The footprints led toward an old, abandoned cabin I hadn't seen on any map. A sense of dread gripped me. Something in Raven's Hollow wanted me to find this place. And as I approached the cabin, I could swear I saw a shadow move behind the cracked window. Though the building had been empty for decades, I approached the cabin cautiously, every step slow and deliberate. The air grew colder, heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. The humming intensified, now joined by faint whispers that seemed to come from the cabin itself. I wanted to turn back, but something compelled me forward, a mix of terror and morbid curiosity. Peering through the cracked window, I saw the interior was strange. Dust-covered furniture arranged neatly, yet the room was immaculate in a way that seemed unnatural. On a small table lay an open journal. The pages were filled with writing that shimmered in the dim light, describing visitors who came to Raven's Hollow and were never seen again. Then I heard it, a slow creak behind me. Spinning around, I saw a shadow glide across the edge of the forest, humanoid, but too tall, too thin, its movements unnervingly smooth. It was watching me, and I realized with a chill that leaving the cabin would be far harder than I had imagined. I stepped inside the cabin cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The journal's pages seemed to glow faintly as if aware of my presence, the words rearranging themselves to form a new entry, one that described my arrival in real time. My heart pounded, and a cold sweat ran down my back. It was then that I noticed the walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly, as though the cabin was alive, observing me. A sudden gust of wind slammed the cabin door shut, plunging the room into shadow. The whispers intensified, now clear and commanding. "You belong here. Stay with us." My flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the room, revealing humanoid forms pressed against the walls, too thin, too tall, their faces featureless, but their intent unmistakable. I backed toward the window, desperate to escape. But the forest outside seemed impossibly far away. Raven's Hollow had drawn me into its heart, and it wasn't finished with me yet. I frantically searched for an exit, but the cabin had transformed. Hallways stretched impossibly long, doors led to empty walls, and the ceiling seemed higher than before. The whispers now echoed in every corner, overlapping, chanting my name with increasing urgency. I could feel unseen eyes tracking every movement, and every instinct screamed that I was not alone. Then I noticed something horrifying. The journal had floated off the table and opened in midair, pages spinning rapidly. The words spelled a single sentence in large, jagged letters. "The town chooses, and it has chosen you." My stomach turned. I understood then that Raven's Hollow didn't just observe, it judged, and once chosen, there was no easy escape. The shadows began moving toward me, gliding silently but inexorably. My pulse raced. I realized the only way to survive might be to confront the town itself, to face whatever dark force had animated this cursed place for decades. I forced myself forward, stepping into the impossibly long hallway. The shadows moved fluidly along the walls, their elongated limbs stretching toward me, yet never quite touching. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping voices calling my name, laughing and pleading all at once. The cabin seemed to pulse with a heartbeat, each thump reverberating through the floor and into my chest. Ahead, I saw a faint glow, a doorway leading to what appeared to be the town square, though I knew it should have been miles away. The fog that usually lingered over Raven's Hollow now poured through the doorway like liquid smoke. I hesitated, then stepped through, feeling the air thicken, pressing against me like the hands of invisible specters. From the mist emerged the townspeople, or what they had become. Shadowed, faceless figures, standing silently in formation. Their presence was oppressive, yet I sensed that if I could endure, I might find a way to escape the town's judgment. I stepped into the town square, heart racing, and immediately felt the oppressive weight of Raven's Hollow itself. The shadows and fog seemed alive, moving with purpose, twisting and coiling around the faceless figures. I realized the town wasn't just haunted, it was a single consciousness, ancient and patient, deciding who would survive and who would be claimed. A sudden voice, deep and resonant, echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Ethan Moore, you cannot leave. The town chooses, and the town remembers." I froze, unable to move, as the faceless figures slowly advanced, forming a ring around me. The ground beneath my feet felt unreal, stretching and shifting like quicksand, threatening to swallow me. Desperation surged. I knew I had one chance, to run through the gap in the fog and escape into the forest beyond. Every step I took was met with resistance, as if the town itself tried to pull me back. Raven's Hollow was patient, but I was determined not to stay. I sprinted toward the edge of the fog, my boots sinking into the soft, wet ground as the faceless figures reached out with impossibly long arms. The whispers had become a deafening roar, all the voices of Raven's Hollow blending into one, urging me to stop, warning me, mocking me. My lungs burned and my muscles screamed, but I refused to slow down. The fog shifted unnaturally, forming a tunnel through which I ran blindly. I could feel the town tugging at me, trying to drag me back into its center. But somehow, by sheer will, I kept moving. As I broke through the edge of the mist, the forest appeared before me. The real world, solid and tangible. I didn't dare look back. I knew that if I did, the shadows might reach out and claim me. Even now, I collapsed into the forest undergrowth, gasping but alive. Raven's Hollow had let me go, for now, but its mark was on me forever. Weeks later, I still wake in the middle of the night, haunted by the memory of Raven's Hollow. The whispers echo in my mind whenever I close my eyes, calling my name softly, insistent and patient. Every town I visit, every shadow I glimpse, feels connected to that silent place, as if Raven's Hollow follows me wherever I go. I understand now that it doesn't just take people. It chooses them, leaving a permanent mark on their souls. The faceless figures, the fog, the shifting buildings, they were all parts of its consciousness, testing me, observing, deciding my fate. I survived, but a piece of me will always remain tethered to that town, a living echo trapped in its silent streets. Raven's Hollow is patient. It waits. And I know one day it may call me back, ready to claim what it believes belongs to it. Until then, I live in constant vigilance, knowing that silence can speak, and sometimes it calls. My name is Clara Bennett, and this happened the summer I visited Birchwood, a small, isolated town in northern Saskatchewan. I was researching abandoned towns for a photography project, drawn to places that seemed frozen in time. Birchwood was peculiar, even during the day. Quiet streets, overgrown lawns, and houses that looked lived in, but eerily empty. Something about the town made my skin crawl, but I couldn't resist capturing it through my lens. On the first night, I stayed in a small guest house at the town's edge. Around midnight, I heard faint cries from outside, like children calling for help. I rushed to the window, but the street was empty, except for a few shadows moving unnaturally along the sidewalks. The wind was still, and the air carried a heavy, almost metallic scent. Then I noticed something terrifying. The windows of several houses flickered with dim candlelight, though no one lived there anymore. And inside, for the briefest moment, I saw figures standing perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Birchwood itself was alive, observing me. Determined to document the town, I wandered the streets the next morning, camera in hand. Every house I passed seemed ordinary until I looked closer. Faint handprints appeared on dusty windows, footprints in overgrown yards that hadn't been walked on in years. By midday, I began noticing something even stranger. The few locals I encountered refused to answer questions about missing families or the history of the town. Their eyes would dart nervously, and they would mutter phrases like, "Don't go there," before disappearing into side streets. That night, the cries returned, louder, more desperate. I followed them toward the center of town, where the old church stood abandoned. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the broken pews, and the floorboards groaned as though carrying weight I couldn't see. Birchwood's secret was waiting, patient and hungry, and I feared I had stepped into something far more sinister than I could escape. I spent hours exploring the abandoned church, snapping photos despite the chill creeping down my spine. The pews were coated in thick dust, but faint footprints crossed the aisle, leading toward the altar, though no one was visible. A strange sensation crawled over my skin, as if unseen eyes were following my every movement. Then I noticed a small, hidden door behind the altar, half concealed by rotting wooden panels. I hesitated, but curiosity pushed me forward. As I pried it open, a cold draft escaped, carrying whispers that I could almost understand. They stayed, and so will you. The interior beyond the door was a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. My flashlight barely pierced the gloom, revealing walls covered in photographs, pictures of families that had lived in Birchwood decades ago. Each image showed the same empty-eyed expressions, and a sense of horror struck me. Many of the faces seemed to shift, as if moving subtly when I wasn't looking directly. Birchwood's vanished families weren't gone. They were waiting. I descended the staircase slowly, my flashlight beam trembling. The air grew colder, thick with a metallic scent and the faint echo of children's laughter. The stairs ended in a long, narrow corridor lined with doors, each one slightly ajar. From inside, I could see flickering candlelight and shadows moving independently of any visible occupants. I reached the first door and peered inside. The room was furnished like a nursery, toys scattered across the floor, and a rocking chair moved gently back and forth on its own. A small, hollow-eyed child stood by the window, facing the wall. When I called out, it didn't respond, and the moment I blinked, it had vanished, leaving only the rocking chair swaying. A low hum resonated through the corridor, growing louder with each step. I realized that Birchwood's vanished families weren't simply missing. They were trapped here, bound to the town's dark will, unable to leave. And now I feared I had joined their numbers. I forced myself forward, moving cautiously down the corridor. The candlelight flickered across the walls, revealing more rooms filled with toys, furniture, and photographs of the missing families. In one room, I saw a mother and father frozen mid-step, their expressions blank, eyes hollow, staring into eternity. My stomach churned, and I felt my pulse quicken. This was no ordinary haunting. The town itself was alive, feeding off the lives of those who entered. Suddenly, a door slammed behind me, and the corridor plunged into darkness. The laughter and whispers crescendoed, surrounding me from every direction. Shadows began to shift independently, forming vague human shapes that drifted toward me, their faces obscured, yet somehow expressing malice. I felt invisible hands tugging at my sleeves, brushing against my skin, but no one was there. I realized with horror that Birchwood didn't just trap the families. It was learning from me, adapting, anticipating my every move. My only thought was escape, but the corridor seemed endless, stretching far beyond what a normal building could contain. I pressed onward, my flashlight flickering as I navigated the twisting corridor. The shadows followed relentlessly, sometimes brushing past me, sending chills down my spine. The whispers morphed into voices I recognized, family names I had read in the photographs, calling to me softly yet insistently, urging me to stop, to join them, to become part of Birchwood. A sudden movement caught my eye, a figure stepping fully into the dim light. It was a man, featureless but human in shape, reaching toward me with elongated limbs. As I recoiled, the corridor twisted again, walls bending unnaturally, floors stretching beneath my feet. Panic surged. I had never believed in anything like this. Yet here I was, trapped inside a town that had rewritten the rules of reality itself. I reached the end of the hallway, or what I hoped was the end, and saw a faint opening leading upward. The faintest hint of moonlight spilling through. My mind screamed to escape. But something told me Birchwood would not let me go without a fight. I crawled toward the faint moonlight, every sense screaming that the shadows were aware of my movement. As I neared the staircase leading to the surface, the walls of the corridor began to pulse like a living creature, contracting and expanding as if to slow me down. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, repeating over and over. Stay. 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 When I finally reached the top of the stairs, the door ahead was no longer the same. It had transformed into a massive, dark void, an endless blackness that seemed to breathe. Figures from the photos, children, mothers, fathers, all appeared, faceless and rigid. forming a silent, unbroken circle around the opening. I realized then that this was the heart of Birchwood's power. The vanishing point where the town claimed its victims, folding reality to trap souls forever. Terror clawed at me, but I forced myself to run through the void, leaping blindly into the unknown, hoping the real world awaited on the other side. I landed hard on solid ground, gasping for air, and looked around. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing Birchwood's empty streets under a pale moon. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, but the air was thick with the town's presence, heavy and watchful. The shadows had not disappeared. They lingered at the edge of vision, moving just beyond the streetlights, whispering my name softly, promising to reclaim me. As I ran toward the outskirts, I passed the empty houses, each window flickering with faint, candle-like lights. I could see the outlines of families, frozen in place, their eyes hollow, silently screaming for help. I understood with a sinking heart that Birchwood didn't release its victims easily. It merely allowed them to survive, temporarily, until it could reclaim them. I reached the forest, collapsing behind a tree, shivering, yet alive. Birchwood had marked me, and I knew one day the town might call me back, patient and eternal. I stumbled through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, but I refused to stop. The whispers followed me, echoing softly through the trees, never far behind. Every so often, I would catch glimpses of figures between the trunks, tall, faceless, rigid, moving in ways no human could. My heart pounded, my breath ragged. Yet some part of me knew that stopping would mean being claimed. After what felt like hours, I reached the edge of the forest and saw the faint glow of the highway lights in the distance. Relief surged through me, but the whispers didn't fade. I dared a glance behind me and saw the outlines of the vanishing families, motionless, watching, waiting for me to slip, to falter. The town itself seemed alive, its hunger patient and eternal. But for now, I had outrun it. I didn't look back again. Birchwood had marked me, and I carried its presence in my mind like a shadow I could never escape. Weeks later, I still feel Birchwood's presence, even miles away. In quiet moments, I hear soft whispers in my ears, echoes of children laughing, adults calling my name, and the low hum of the town itself. Every abandoned building I pass, every shadow at the edge of my vision, reminds me that Birchwood does not forget. I realized that the vanished families were never gone. They were part of the town's consciousness, trapped in a cycle of silence and observation. And I carry a piece of that darkness now, a permanent reminder that some places are not just haunted. They are alive, patient, and waiting for the next visitor foolish enough to wander too close. I survived Birchwood, but a part of me will forever remain tethered to the vanishing families, bound to the town's insatiable hunger. And I know, deep down, one day it will call me back. The horrors of these small towns are not just stories. They are echoes of places where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the familiar hides unimaginable terror. From the silent streets of Raven's Hollow to the vanishing families of Birchwood, Canada's forgotten corners hold secrets that few dare to uncover. Each of these tales reminds us that evil can linger anywhere, in abandoned farmhouses, in dense forests, or in quiet streets where the world has forgotten to look. The people who lived through these events survived, but they carry the memories and the fear forever. And perhaps that is the greatest horror of all, that even when we escape, the darkness follows. If tonight's stories have chilled you, remember, these are not legends or myths. They are real accounts from ordinary people, and the shadows of these towns may be closer than you think. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.